Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I am Matthew Lucas, and we do post every week on a Friday, so do hit subscribe if you want to follow our continuing horticultural adventures so that you too can become a horticulturalist just like Stephen.
Well, exactly. And if you've got a question for us, please put it in the comments section below, and we do shorts on a Monday where in 60 seconds I try and answer your questions.
Do remember to say where you are in your question, and it helps Stephen formulate his answer to
Exactly.
your burning horticultural question. My burning horticultural question, look at this bark. Now, I oft walk along here and we're in the Royal Melbourne Botanic Gardens. Many thanks to the gardens for welcoming us today. I have photographed this bark so many times, Stephen. What is it?
Well, this is an Australian kauri, one of 3 species we have in Australia, and the most commonly grown one, which is Agathis robusta.
Yes.
And robusta, of course, means big and strong. And it is definitely that because it's one of the largest species in the genus, comes from Queensland, and yet grows perfectly well down in southern Australia in Victoria. And this tree probably was planted back in the days of either Baron von Mueller or perhaps William Guilfoyle. So it would be well in excess of 100 years old.
It's the most magnificent tree. But what are we actually here to talk about, Steve?
Well, really what we're here to talk about actually is mainly the New Caledonian conifers. And of course, New Caledonia has a range of Agathis. It also has a range of Araucarias. And so we're going to look at several of those to get our heads around some of these really interesting tropical southern conifers.
Close cousins.
Yes, they are in fact quite close cousins. And they're a fascinating group of conifers, many of which don't actually look that much like a conifer, I have to say.
Let's go look at the first one.
What a good idea.
New Caledonian tree number 1.
Exactly. Behind us is Araucaria montana, one of the monkey puzzle group of trees that comes from New Caledonia. Now, Araucarias, of course, are classical Gondwanan trees, so they have various places they come from. It's a genus of only around about 20 species. There are 2 in South America. There are a couple in Australia. If you include Norfolk Island as part of Australia, which it sort of is, it's not so much, politically, not so much geographically. And New Caledonia has 14 species. So it's the epicenter of this ancient group of conifers. And the reason is that New Caledonia never went underwater during one of those ice age periods and then the global warming periods between. And of course, it also has a very interesting soil profile. And so a lot of things speciated on New Caledonia to get used to serpentine soils and soils high in nickel and, you know, all the different things that are happening in that island geography. And so some of these trees, like Montana here, which is the summit Araucaria, it grows up on the higher peaks, and it's certainly one of the more cold hardy species from New Caledonia. They all evolved in slightly different ways in New Caledonia. So there you go. So this one is not a particularly big growing one because it comes from high up, but it has really fat, interesting branches on it. It's not a prickly one like the South American ones. And in fact, our major one here, the bunya pine, of course, is also very, very prickly to touch. So if you had a plant of Araucaria montana available to you...
It's not prickly.
You did the test, did you?
The prickle test.
And it's not a big tree, so if it were more available, it's tenuously available here in Australia for sale, it would certainly be a tree worthy of consideration if you're looking for a serious conversation piece.
Now, we've had this conversation a few times about the group of these trees in New Caledonia, and your pet theory is that they have survived changes in temperature, including cooling periods, so they do seem to be quite cold tolerant.
At least more cold tolerant than you would imagine from the climate they actually come from. Because New Caledonia is not renowned for its frosts.
Or snow.
Funnily enough, or snow. I mean, it can get cool up on the mountain peaks, but really, in the scheme of things, it hardly sees any cold at all. And yet I'm growing this tree slowly but well at Macedon, where we get a few degrees of frost most winters. And it's doing surprisingly well.
And this is beautiful here in Melbourne. So again, contextualize Melbourne's climate. We don't have the same climatic zonage as you do in the States. We would describe ourselves as either wet Mediterranean, warm temperate. Essentially, our winters in the inner city don't freeze. We don't get to 0 degrees centigrade or 32 Fahrenheit in the city centre. You can the further out you get from Melbourne.
And of course, the further out you get from Melbourne too, once you go inland further, you also tend to get more heat in the summer, because Melbourne often gets the coastal sea breezes in the afternoon, so it doesn't get as hot as it can in some of the more northerly parts.
So we're kind of lucky to be in a botanical hotspot, Stephen.
We certainly are, and in a particularly good botanic garden to look at them.
Yes. All right. Well, let's go and look at another one.
All right.
Stephen, I feel, is this a New Caledonian glade?
Well, it sort of is. We're standing in a glade of Araucarias,
Yeah.
most of which are Araucaria columnaris,
Yeah.
which is another one of the New Caledonian Araucaria species, one of their 14.
Yeah.
This one is known as the Captain Cook pine.
Yeah.
Probably he
Perhaps.
was the first Westerner to see it, I guess, or at least somebody on his ship might have been. And it's quite a tall growing tree, and it always has a lean to it, so the trunks never seem to grow dead straight. So
No.
it seems to be part of the character of the tree.
And they're all leaning in the same direction. It's quite odd. It's very beautiful, though. Now, you've mentioned this again in other videos, but the Araucarias can make really good potted specimens to start with, the beginning of their life, because they're such slow growers.
Well, a lot of them are quite slow, and because they come from subtropical to tropical climes, like many plants from those sort of parts of the world, they actually do make very good indoor pot plants. So the Norfolk Island pine, these columnarises, the hoop pines, all those other different varieties of Araucarias, as young plants make decidedly good pot plants. So if you're looking for a statuesque tree that you can cope with until it hits the ceiling, you could do far worse than grow some of these. And of course, in colder climates where they're probably not going to survive outdoors, why not have one as an indoor plant?
You've got to decide what to do with it when it gets big.
Well, you ring up the local botanic gardens and hopefully they will accept a donation from you when it does get too large for you.
So again, similar hardiness to the other ones we're looking at.
Yeah,
So
they're all in the same sort of general range when it comes to the Araucarias of New Caledonia. Montana's probably just fractionally tougher than most of the others, but they'd be all zone 9-ish sort of trees.
So they can all
most of
go
them.
down to basically 0 centigrade, 32 Fahrenheit, generally. And I've got 2 of them growing in the garden at home, and they obviously go down even a little bit lower than that at odd times during the winter. And they're not growing madly fast, but they're fine. They're doing... They don't need to.
No, and in fact, I'm happy to watch them grow. I'm here for the long haul, not for the short
haul.
Yeah, so I'm just happy to have them.
Now, another observation, this is quite a sheltered little grove. So is this an understory tree?
No, and if you go to New Caledonia, most of these trees will grow out on the rocky bluffs above the ocean, all sorts of weird places.
Interesting you mentioned that, because the hoop pine, the Australian member of this family, I saw growing wild in Hamilton Island, and that was literally a cliff grower, and they were quite stunted and in quite harsh conditions and in full sun. I did notice the ones that are growing here in the Botanic Gardens look so beautiful and healthy.
Yeah, it makes a difference if they've got a bit of shelter, but a lot of these trees do in fact grow out in quite exposed and difficult conditions in the wild, which doesn't mean they grow to their best. It's just what they have adapted to deal with in the wild. Given other conditions, you can actually sometimes grow them better, so why not indeed?
There you go. Well, they are beautiful here. Well, let's go and see what else you found. Now, I seem to remember you recently planted one in your garden, Stephen. What was it?
Well, actually, I've planted several, but the one we actually featured in one of our videos was Araucaria RULEI, which is also one of the New Caledonian conifers.
Let's have a look at that.
All right, so I've mentioned that I do a little bit of replanting as we go along. I've had this Araucaria RULEI, which is a very rare monkey puzzle relative from New Caledonia, sitting around in a pot for ages and been looking for the posi to put it in. And it's surprising how often when I sort of prune back and clean up some of the detritus of my bushes, I suddenly have a gap. And of course, this will eventually grow into quite a tall tree. I'll have to think about how I open up a space, if I live long enough, up above it somewhere. But in the meantime, it's going to make a really interesting sculptural effect in the border.
Is it still thriving?
Yes, it's still perfect.
Well, it was only a few weeks ago we filmed it. I should hope so.
Yeah.
But let's go on to the next New Caledonian one.
What a good idea. All right, Matthew, another genus of conifers from New Caledonia, which is sort of iconic, are the Agathis, the kauris. Again, New Zealand has one. It doesn't have any Araucarias, by the way, but it has one Agathis.
Yeah.
Australia has 3. New Caledonia has something like 6 or 7. And the genus itself is only about 22 species, which includes some that come from New Guinea, and some of the islands, Fiji and Vanuatu has its own Agathis as well. And so the one behind us is a young plant of Agathis lanceolata.
That
which
very
is
shiny, not the prickly one, sorry, that shiny trunk there,
Yep.
which we'll show you.
Yes, and it is a remarkably large growing tree, like most of the Agathis are. And lanceolata will grow into quite a towering tall tree. Some of the New Caledonian ones actually grow candelabra shaped, so they have a quite different habit.
Yeah.
So there we go, another conifer from New Caledonia that doesn't look like one.
It doesn't look like one. It's got those leaves that don't look conifer-like. Now, Stephen, did we not film in the Melbourne University System Garden and
Agathis.
Agathis? We'll drop that footage in right here.
Yes.
So I see you found the Araucarias again, Stephen.
Well, in this case, the Araucariaceae, it's an Agathis, or what we would call in Australia a kauri pine. But this one's not one of the Australian ones. This is one of the New Caledonian ones.
Yeah.
So it comes from the tropical islands of New Caledonia. It's Agathis MOOREI.
Yes.
And it's another one of those interesting groups of trees that sort of have the Gondwanan connection.
Yeah.
Because we have 3 species in Australia. They have about 7 or 8, I think, in New Caledonia. There's 1 or 2 that come from Papua New Guinea. There's 1 from New Zealand. And so that sort of gives you a sense of the distribution. Oh, I forgot the one in Vanuatu and Fiji as well.
There you
So they're tropical conifers. They're not very cold tolerant. Although, having said that, I've got a young plant of this one, MOOREI, growing in the garden at Macedon in a very sheltered spot. And it's now a little taller than I am. So we're going along well.
And interestingly too, I mean, looking at it, of course, it doesn't look like a needle. It doesn't look like a conifer.
Yeah, exactly. It looks more like a broad-leafed plant.
Yeah.
But strictly speaking, these are probably still needles.
Isn't that a wonderful garden? If you haven't seen the video, you will find the link here.
Yes, and do visit if you happen to be in Melbourne.
Well, that was a wonderful romp through New Caledonia, Stephen.
Yeah, I'd like to go back there again and visit some more of the flora. Did you know?
Yes. No, I was going to say, I am desperate to, but yes, go on.
A little aside, New Caledonia has the world's only fully parasitic conifer, called, funnily enough, parasitaxis. And it grows in dark forests. It has no green pigment whatsoever. It looks like brown coral. And it's a small shrub, and it's a parasite of another comparatively rare New Caledonian conifer.
Wow.
So there's a great dead end in evolution for you if there ever was one.
Hey ho. But we're ending kind of where we began. We began in Queensland with that wonderful tree. And then this is another Australian member of the family.
In fact, it even extends into New Guinea. And this is Araucaria Cunninghamii, which is the hoop pine. And it is another large and impressive conifer.
And weirdly, I was recently in Hamilton Island and I took some photographs of this tree, which I'll drop in now. And I actually sent them to Stephen to say, Stephen, what is this? And he told me. So I then had to find out who Cunningham was. And he was an early naval officer who was also charged with collecting botany up the east coast of Australia in the early 19th century.
Yeah. And there's a number of plants with his name there commemorated.
He was busy scrabbling up and down stony outcrops on the east coast of Australia.
There you go.
Now, how can we possibly top our New Caledonian epic?
Well, by going somewhere else, I guess. But it is a wonderful flora, and it's well worthwhile a visit if you get the opportunity. And if you can't get to New Caledonia, at least they have a reasonable little collection of them here in the Botanic Gardens in Melbourne.
So come to the Melbourne Botanic Gardens and see everything that your heart might desire. And if you want to see what we're doing next week, hit subscribe. We post every Friday. And if you have a question for Stephen Ryan,
please post it in the comments below. Tell me where you come from, and I will try and answer your question in 60 seconds.
there you go. But until then, we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right, bye all.